syphilis testing, and offering friendly support on all things sexual health. Outside of sexual health, Leo often provides support, advice, and signposting on trans and non-binary issues, including transitional healthcare to the Rainbow Project's clients, health professionals, and other organisations or businesses. Leo is a transgender man who managed to get access to the Gender Identity Clinic in 2016 before they closed their doors to new clients for over 5 years. So I'd just like to welcome Leo to give his little presentation.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Stacey. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Leo Lardy. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I just wanted to briefly touch on the state of transitional healthcare in Northern Ireland. And the outline brief is that it's not great. It's not even good. Basically, if you're not aware already, for someone to access things like hormones or any surgeries, they have to go through the Gender Identity Clinic. So that requires a referral from your GP to our only gender identity clinic in Knockbracken in Belfast. From that referral, you will then begin an assessment process, a really prolonged psychiatric assessment, which for some people can last anywhere from 2 years onward before you can get approval to start hormones, and even longer before you're able to access surgery. Now, the Gender Identity Clinic functions sort of as a gatekeeper for further care and medical intervention. The way the Gender Identity Clinic is set up is not necessarily to support the health and well-being of trans and non-binary individuals. At least that's how I and many members of my community would feel, but rather as a way to make sure that no cisgender person, i.e. someone who is not trans, does not accidentally transition. It is a really difficult process accessing the Gender Identity Clinic, not least of all because of, on average, a 5-year wait to access the service. Now, that's not a 5-year wait to get access to hormones and surgeries. That is a 5-year wait to begin a years-long process in order to access those transitional treatments. And it is just so unbearably long. The reason that a lot of trans and non-binary people need to access things like hormones and surgeries is because gender dysphoria, the feeling of discomfort, of unease, of anxiety, when your body doesn't match the expectations of what is typical for your gender identity. And those expectations can be your own, or they can be other people's, like men do not have breasts, men have deeper voices, women are hairless, and things like that. So most people are accessing those services because they feel dysphoria, or at the very least because they feel if they access those things, they would be able to feel more comfortable and confident in being who they really are. So it is a vital service. It is a life-saving service. I cannot tell you the difference in my mental health when I was finally able to access hormones 2 years into accessing the Gender Identity Clinic. I am one of the very few lucky ones who managed to get into the Gender Identity Clinic before it closed its doors to new clients for over 5 years. I believe there is a backlog of at least 500 patients who are still yet to access the service. And many people have not seen movement in that waitlist for several years now. I do know they have reopened their doors again, but it's still going to take a really long time to get through that backlog. And that might be because there is inadequate funding, there is a lack of services and a lack of staff available at the Gender Identity Clinic. But my argument would be that the reason that we are often held back in the Gender Identity Clinic is because we are holding on to this old system, which is the mental health model. And so basically what we currently view trans and non-binary issues as is a mental health issue. And the WPATH guidelines and the World Organization for Health have declassified trans and non-binary issues as a mental health issue and instead a sexual health issue, which is just, it's not brilliant, but it's slightly better than it being deemed a mental health problem. And because it is in the realm of mental health, what happens is that someone who is accessing that service must present themselves as mentally stable, incredibly confident, and incredibly certain of what their gender identity is, how they're going to live as their gender identity, and what they want from transitional services. But trans and non-binary people are more likely than anyone to suffer poor mental health, anything from self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and even suicide attempts. Many people in our community have severe mental health problems, and that's not because we are transgender or non-binary, but rather because of how society treats trans and non-binary people, and especially how people treat us when we do not match up with what people expect from our gender identity. So before I was able to access hormones and surgery, but specifically hormones, I would have been mistaken for a woman frequently. I mean, every single day I probably had the conversation, no, I'm a man, please use he, him pronouns, multiple times a day, if not hundreds of times a day. And that was really damaging for my mental health, because it felt like no matter how much I commanded a room, no matter how confident I was, no matter how much I complained to the contrary, people were seeing me for who I wasn't really, and that they were seeing me as female, and that made me feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Whenever I was able to access top surgery and hormones, my mental health greatly, greatly improved. Not just because other people began to see me as the gender identity I am, but also I could finally see who I really was too. And instead of being bogged down by dysphoria, I felt nothing but euphoria and elation at being able to live and work and be in the world as a trans man. But to access those services, you have to be mentally stable. But it is incredibly difficult to be mentally stable when you are dealing with gender dysphoria, when you are dealing with discrimination or harassment or even hate crime. And those things are impacted by your ability to pass in the community. It may have been slightly easier for me because as a transgender man, even if people perceive me as being female, there really was no concern about me wearing jeans, shorts, t-shirts, and not looking very feminine, because we kind of expect that from people who are women to wear more masculine clothes from time to time. But for my friends who are trans women or trans girls, if they have to act and dress a certain way to feel comfortable, the rest of the world does not perceive that as normal or as okay, and they will receive a lot more harassment, discrimination, and hate crime. So accessing those hormones and those surgeries makes their life a lot easier, not just for themselves, but so that they can, for lack of a better term, fit in with what other people expect, and to avoid that kind of discrimination and that harassment. So I think it's really cruel to hold back the very thing that will help us feel comfortable and confident and accepted in society by our mental health standards. It is very difficult to deal with dysphoria, misgendering, and dead naming on a daily basis, especially if you already have prior mental health conditions. And as someone who accessed the gender identity clinic myself, I often felt like I was ticking off a silent checklist. I knew that there was some things that they wanted to hear me say in order to progress my transition further. But for the life of me, I wouldn't have known what those things were. And oftentimes when I first began my journey in the gender identity clinic, I had kind of wrongly and kind of naively assumed that they were there to support and to help me discover my gender identity, as much as help me access transitional healthcare. But what I learned very, very quickly is that if I showed any doubts, if I showed any concerns, if I was worried in any shape or capacity, then my transition would be held back. So I probably, for the first 3 months of appointments, was very open and honest about my concerns and my issues in transitioning to be a man. Whether people would accept me, whether it was what I wanted, whether I was certain. And very quickly, that all changed for me. I began to meet more trans and non-binary people. I came out and socially transitioned. I told my friends and my family. I was loved and accepted at work, at home, and with my friends. But even after I kind of changed my tune and was like, no, this is something I definitely want to do. I'm feeling very confident. This is what I want. I found the things and phrases that I said in the first 3 months of knowing them were held against me for, I am not joking, entire years. And the problem with the gender identity clinic as well is that they are judging whether you are a man or a woman based on honestly quite outdated, sexist, and stereotypical data. So I would consider myself a pretty manly man. I am also, though, a gay man. I am quite flamboyant. I love to talk with my hands. I would consider myself very camp, and that gives me a lot of joy in who I am. I love being a camp gay man. But for the gender identity clinic, at least from my understanding, saw that as a reason as to why I wasn't a man. You know, I'd be told, men don't act this way. It's not usual for men to be like you. You're very empathetic. You're very kind. You're very sensitive. That's not very typical for a man to portray such traits. So maybe you're not a man. And obviously that makes me roll my eyes and very frustrated and angry, because there's a lot of men that I know, cisgender men, who act just like me, and no one ever tells them that they are not a man. But I had to squeeze and fit myself into this almost 1950s stereotype of what a man was to be seen and accepted. I had to dress a certain way, I had to act a certain way, and I had to talk a certain way. And this is just the way that the gender identity clinic works. It's driven on these idea of what a man or a woman is meant to be, when in 2022 we kind of know that there are all shapes and types of men, women, and people. Just because you are a woman does not mean you're going to have long hair and prefer to wear dresses and have acrylic nails. In the same way that being a man doesn't mean you might not enjoy nail polish or makeup or want to have hairless legs. But we're still using those categories to judge trans and non-binary people. Honestly, the assessment process in the gender identity clinic is heavily pathologizing, and it does feel like trans identity is treated as a mental disorder. Not that this is a unique part of my identity that should be celebrated and affirmed, but rather it is an issue that needs to be fixed. And the assessment criteria for the gender identity clinic is incredibly invasive, uncomfortable, and in some cases may breach human rights. I was asked a number of questions that sometimes I don't even feel comfortable sharing, such as, what did I think about when I pleasured myself? Did I ever get hugged as a child? Yes, obviously. And many other really invasive questions about my identity. But also, to access that service, you also have to do basically a trauma history, everything that has happened in your life up until this moment. And for me, like many other LGBT people, I have been the victim of domestic violence, I have been the victim of sexual assault, and I have been the victim of long-term homophobic hate crime and homophobic bullying. That stuff is not my fault. I survived that stuff. I'm very proud of it. And I think it's made me into the person that I am today. But it was very frustrating that those traumas that happened to me against my will were then made to be blocking walls to me accessing transition. So me being a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault made them question whether or not I wanted to be trans because I am trans, or just to escape what happened to me as a woman, which is very, very, very frustrating to think that somebody who had essentially ruined my life many years ago gets to continue ruining my life. Transgender people shouldn't have to disclose all of their traumas and personal histories to access kind, affirming, and effective care. And it really does breach human rights in some instances. Clients often, what we find is that clients will misreport their mental health to the gender identity clinic, and that they will misreport their gender identity in order to access services easier. So same thing that I did. I stopped having any doubts that were very reasonable and fair to have. I stopped questioning myself in front of the gender identity clinic, and I just drew the line of, this is what I want, this is what I need to happen, and I'm going to keep on doing this until you give it to me. And even though there were some times that my mental health totally completely crashed into the floor, I refused to tell them about it because I knew it would block me again. So my struggles with borderline personality disorder and depression or anxiety, I kept them fully out of the room because I knew that it would be seen not as this person is struggling with mental illness because they're not able to feel comfortable and confident in their body. It became, this person is struggling with mental illness. They're not able to access the care that would make their life so much easier. It's a real catch-22. And what we often find, especially at Rainbow Project, is that clients have to seek out professional help elsewhere because the system and the assessment is so traumatizing in of itself. You're not given any mental health support, and you're actually kind of punished for asking for help, that you've got to access it elsewhere, which is why many of our clients come to the Rainbow Project whilst accessing the GIC. So it is a real catch-22 service. We did a little state of the community survey last year just about LGBTQ people's experiences in daily life in Northern Ireland, and we asked about the Gender Identity Clinic, and here are some damning examples here. So not supportive, no mental health support or support in partially navigating transition, fear of gatekeeping, unnecessary and invasive questions about personal life, and also invasive clinical examinations. This other person said, I found that previous answers or comments were used against me, which felt incredibly unfair, especially as some of these comments were made within the first 2 to 3 sessions with them. It was apparent to me that they didn't rate or understand my experience as a trans man unless it perfectly aligned with what they expected of a man to be, which at times felt very sexist and homophobic. So right now, the way it works in Northern Ireland, if someone wants to access hormones or surgeries in a timely manner, they have to go privately. So we are seeing a situation in which trans people are having to pay hundreds of pounds a month to access routine care that is available for cisgender men and cisgender women. Because when we're talking about hormone replacement therapy, we are talking about testosterone and estrogen. These things are both available to cisgender people within a GP appointment. There is really no difference in care between me taking testosterone to transition and a cisgender man taking testosterone because he has a low testosterone level. Yet my care needs to be examined and assessed and held in certain places, whereas another man can just go to their GP appointment. And what I think is really interesting as well is that if a cisgender woman needed to get access to estrogen for their menopause, if the doctor had said to her, well, I don't think you don't really need this medication because you don't really look like a woman to me. I see you've got your hair short and you're not wearing dresses, you're wearing jeans. Maybe next time I'll give you your estrogen when you come in wearing a dress and some heels, okay? Pop away on. You'd probably punch that GP, wouldn't you? Think about it, wouldn't you? You get very mad. And yet that's what happens to transgender individuals, and we're just expected to take it. And quite frankly, we are needing an overhaul in gender identity services. This service is not going to get any less packed if we continue with this long, unnecessary psychiatric evaluation that just holds up clients who don't need it. Yes, there should be an opportunity for people to access impartial advice, support, and counseling around their gender identity, but not every trans person who accesses that space needs to prove themselves or needs to find that self-confidence. We shouldn't be demanding people go through 2 years of psychiatric assessment before they can get hormones and surgery. It's just backing up the clinic, it's holding up resources and staff, and it's slowing down. It's actually causing issues for people who don't need it. If I don't need counseling around my gender identity, then I don't want to talk to you about it, quite frankly. What we want to happen in the future is to see a service that is more focused on primary care, that is GP-led, that doesn't follow the psychiatric model, that doesn't gatekeep based on mental health, because our inability to access transition causes poor mental health. So it's not fair to hold us to that standard. We want to see any new service being co-developed and co-produced meaningfully with the trans, non-binary community and community sector organizations. And what we need to see is first and foremost, the Gender Identity Clinic to understand the great distress that they have caused many trans and non-binary patients. What as well we see is that even though people are having to access hormones and surgery privately, that they're not being able to access routine monitoring or checkups within the NHS. So on top of paying for your hormones, some people are not able to get those prescriptions filled at their GP because the GP is uncomfortable with shared care, even though in some cases they are doing it in the exact same family for the exact same medication. The only difference is one of the person is cis, and the other person is trans. We are not able to get access to endocrinologist services without paying a really hefty fine. Blood tests cost like 60 to 70 pounds. And to get those done every year on top of the money you have to pay is ridiculous. And what is really interesting to me is that we're just okay with this. And I think what's frustrating is I think a lot of people are like, well, you should be happy for what you get and what you have, when the trans community have been crying out for as long as I've been trans that this is inhumane and unnecessary, unethical, and just sometimes a waste of time. So we really need to see a change in things soon, because trans and non-binary people really deserve to have adequate, appropriate, affirming care. We are not a dangerous group of people. And generally the reason as to why this assessment process exists is because of this false narrative around transitional regret, people regretting transition. But when you look into the statistics of trans regret, it is less than 1% of all the trans people surveyed. And of those people who have regretted transition, those people have regretted transition because of the harassment, the discrimination, and the hate crime that they experience as a transgender person. And they have not stopped identifying as a trans man or a trans woman or non-binary. They have just socially detransitioned in order to make their life easier. So why is it that we are not listening to the thousands and thousands of trans men and women who are desperately dying for a service that needs to work efficiently and effectively, but we're very happy to listen to just a small percentage of those people who agree with them? I know why. It's transphobia, plain and simple. I don't want to talk on too long, Stacey. I don't know how much time I've got. So if I've got more, tell me. But if I need to shut up, I'll shut
No,
up.
work away, work away.
I've got plenty of time left. What we also find as well, it's very important to mention for non-binary people, is that there are not the same kind of ways to assess and categorize someone as non-binary. I talked about how they use sexist, outdated stereotypes to judge who is a man and who is a woman down to what they wear and how they act. But when it comes to non-binary people, they don't necessarily have that same assessment criteria. And in some ways that makes them incapable to judge whether someone is non-binary or not. And by the Gender Identity Clinic's own admission, they would say that there has only ever been 2 non-binary people who have accessed their service. That is an outright blatant lie. And I'm not saying that the GIC are lying about how many non-binary people are presenting to them, but rather it shows the number of non-binary people who are hiding their gender identity and instead opting for a more traditional, I'm a trans man, I'm a trans woman, in order to access their healthcare. Because non-binary people have a fair expectation that the Gender Identity Clinic is not going to accept them for who they are and will not provide them with hormones or surgery because they view them as being on the fence or not certain about their gender identity. There was very recently a review into gender identity services with some of the community sector organizations and trans and non-binary people. That report, I believe, has been published. I was on that panel, and I would say it was probably one of the most difficult work experiences that I've had to date at Rainbow Project, if only because it became very apparent to me the barriers in place for trans and non-binary people to access affirming and respectful care, because really it is very frustrating to know the experiences of an entire community, both on a personal level and on a professional level, to be able to communicate those experiences very clearly and very openly and very honestly, and then hearing those experiences be described as too complicated, as not representative of the whole of the group. Not every trans and non-binary person thinks or feels the same way, and there are very many people, I'm sure, who have had good to decent experiences with the Gender Identity Clinic, and we're not saying those people are wrong. I'm so happy that they had a good experience at the Gender Identity Clinic, but it is completely unfair to equate a handful of people who had a decent experience to the hundreds of people who have had really severely poor experiences with the Gender Identity Clinic. Most people surveyed in the State of the Community survey said that their mental and emotional well-being actually deeply decreased whilst accessing the Gender Identity Clinic, and that's not normal, and that's not okay. And what makes me feel even more stressed out about this is that there is a gender identity youth service called COI, or Knowing Our Identity. And now, ideally, they are meant to be able to provide puberty blockers to young people. These are reversible medications that basically delay the onset of puberty, allowing a young person time and space to figure out what it is that they want, if indeed they are transgender or non-binary, without having to go through what can be a very upsetting puberty. It's very, very traumatic to go through a puberty that you don't want to go through. But ever since the Kira Bell case, where someone basically argued that the gender identity clinic gave them puberty blockers and ruined their life. An appeal which was recently overturned and said, no, the gender identity clinic was right to do that. Even though that case has been overturned and the gender identity clinic has been proven to be in the right in that case, we have still found that the COI has not begun to allow young people to access puberty blockers. And what I often say to young people accessing our service is that I wouldn't generally recommend going through COI. As a 25-year-old adult with the love and support of, I am not joking you, an entire community, the gender identity clinic was the most stressful and traumatic period of my life. And I don't think I will ever get over how deeply disgusting and wrong and immoral they made me feel for being a trans person. I'm a very proud and happy and confident trans person, and even I felt the mark that they left on me as an adult. I cannot imagine the trauma and the distress it would cause for a 13-year-old to go through that service. As a 25-year-old, I'm slightly more able to shout back, to yell, to ask for help, to ask for support. I can't imagine what would it be like to be a 13-year-old with two very qualified clinicians telling you that, no, maybe you're not non-binary, maybe you're just not sure of yourself, maybe you're just gay and you just haven't figured that out yet. So the service overall needs to change. And what I would say to everybody here is to be really mindful of the kind of false rhetoric that comes up about trans healthcare. Trans people know what they want. Trans people know what they need. This is not high-level care. This is medication that any cisgender person can access via their GP. You have to trust that we know how we feel, and that sometimes gender identity is not something that you can explain. I can do my absolute best to explain it, but at the end of the day, I just know. And that's hard to show to somebody, but I shouldn't have to prove that I know who I am by conforming, squeezing myself into the box of what it is to be a man, or at least the 1950s Mad Men version of a man, to receive adequate healthcare. And it is a mental health crisis that we are seeing in our trans and non-binary community. The absolute despair that people feel knowing that they're not going to be able to feel any comfort or confidence in themselves until they're able to access the gender identity clinic, which could literally be 5 to 6 years after they enter, which could then be another 2 to 3 years before they get hormones, which could be another 6 years before they get access to surgery. It's no wonder that so many people are literally putting themselves under the poverty line, and sometimes even engaging in sex work to be able to afford their medication. And what we're finding as well is a lot of young trans women, and even older trans women as well, are having to buy their hormones off the black market without any monitoring or any harm reduction being done. We are forcing trans people to go through unsafe, unregulated treatments because we're not providing any service for them at all. So it's funny to me that we think that it's okay to torture trans people in a psychiatric setting, to hold them back for their own safety. And then when someone says, actually, I'm doing something quite dangerous, I'm self-medicating without support supervision, we then don't want to help them. So yes, it is a mess. It needs to be solved. Trans and non-binary people deserve to live free, comfortably, and happy within themselves. And it is completely and utterly possible. So I'll shush now, but thank you.
Thank you, Leo. That was super important to hear, to be honest. Does anybody have any questions for Leo?
I did see a question in the chat about how the Northern Irish GIC compares to other clinics in the United Kingdom. Honestly, across the board, gender identity clinics in the UK are not great. Even the Dublin model is not great. Nearly every clinic in the UK follows the psychiatric model. There are a few new pilot programs that are GP-led, that are nurse-led in Manchester and Soho that have such glowing recommendations from trans and non-binary people online, but we probably have the longest wait list out of any clinic in the United Kingdom at the moment. For a while, our wait list had a little infinity symbol on it, so it's pretty bad, but it's bad across the board. Lucia, do you have a question there?
I do indeed. Good afternoon, Leo and everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Leo, thank you so much for that inspirational um, information. My question is, where in society do you start to help and assist in this area? And is it something that from birth, parents, teachers, and all should recognize as a young child, and start this journey at a time whenever society would have you deny when your child's younger if they have non-binary, or if they're gay or whatever. But how, I mean, it's such a minefield, it's such a big issue. And never mind the underfunding in mental health, apart from the GICs, and apart from anything else, and the NHS and the state it's in. How do you or anybody think we can help to tackle this? Because you have to start from
Somewhere.
a point where you identify from an early age, and you get that support right through. And often gay people would be afraid of coming out, and whatever family circumstances, religion, all of the different things that prevent you from coming out.
Mm.
But if you started from a point where as you're growing up, we could change society. It's a big question, I know, but
No,
how
it's all right.
how do
I'll
we
give it.
go
I'll give
about
it
that?
best go.
You know what I mean?
So what I would say to you, first and foremost, if you want to be an ally to the trans and non-binary community, then we need you to start showing up. And I think probably the most practical way that you can show up is transgender, trans and non-binary pride is happening again this August after 3 years of no trans pride because of COVID. And I imagine a great deal of the rally on Saturday, the 20th of August, will be around the inaccess of healthcare and the state of healthcare. So bodies on the street is a great way to show that you are unhappy with the current situation. I would also really recommend that you follow Transgender NI on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter, and even indeed the Rainbow Project, because they are often sharing petitions, information, which you can get involved with. I think the problem is the trans and non-binary community. We're a lot of people, more people than you would expect, but we're still a minority in this community. So we need allies to be able to stand up for us as well. And I think that comes as well, even just from challenging people when you overhear transphobic talking points. So quite often I will hear really lovely, sweet, kind individuals say things like, I don't think trans women should be allowed to be at my gym or in my toilet, because what if a cis man uses that as an excuse to harass someone? And just to say, well, that's unacceptable. Why are you judging trans women by what a sexual predator may do? Why do you view trans women as inherently dangerous? And I think what's really interesting about those turf talking points is no one is ever talking about me. No one is ever talking about trans men. No one is ever threatened by me, although sometimes they should be. It's only ever trans women. So especially if you are a cisgender woman, we need your voice to shout out and say, that's not okay, or that's not actually true. So that's a huge part, just tackling transphobia in a day-to-day basis and just saying, I accept and I love trans people, whatever way they present themselves. And I think about your question, like, how do we support people long-term, or how do we make this society better? I think a lot of it has to do with providing adequate and appropriate sex education at every level of someone's educational understanding. We often in Rainbow Project only do like relationship and sexuality education with people in youth groups and community centers. We're not really allowed in schools, and that is very frustrating to us because people often see LGBT identity as something that is inherently explicit and should not be talked around children or young people, when there are children and young people in that class who may very well be LGBTQ themselves. So I think when we're expecting young people to come out earlier or to be able to communicate this, we're asking for a huge thing. I didn't even know that trans men existed until, I am not joking, I was 22, and I figured out I was trans at 25. And I think just, even in the home, like talking about transgender people, mentioning their achievements and talking them in a good light is always a good way to show the young people and the people in your life that you are accepting and welcoming of all people. I think that's a huge question, but it's something to start with. And also, if you do have any concerns about your family or your friends or anyone at work, please do get in touch with the Rainbow Project, because sometimes you just need to hear an example of how you can bring something up to help somebody else kind of be more comfortable. And I'd certainly say in the workplace setting, it is always appreciated if even you as a cisgender person share your pronouns either on your email, on your Zoom, or when you're talking to people, because that makes trans and non-binary people feel much more comfortable to share their own, which you may not expect based on how they look. And I saw Mary just put in the chat, could you explain the gender critical debate in simple terms for people who don't understand the arguments? Mary, I will try. I don't understand the arguments either. Basically, the idea is that trans women are dangerous, that they are not allowed, they should not be in spaces with cisgender women, because trans women are dangerous. And that is essentially the argument. They misrepresent trans women as sexual predators, as sexual deviants. In a lot of ways, I'm sure some of you will remember the homophobia of the 80s and 90s, the articles in newspapers about gay teachers, gay youth workers, gay scout leaders, and why they were dangerous and how on earth could they be with children. We are just seeing that recycled all over again, but for trans people. There's a trans woman competing at the Olympics. Obviously, she has an unnatural she has a natural advantage because she was not assigned female at birth, when we all know that hormones can actually change the way your body works and actually remove any advantage that you have. And when it comes to trans men, the gender critical debate is that people like me aren't actually men, but we are confused and lost lesbians. And unfortunately, that is just not the case, because I am gay as a $3 bill. So it's very frustrating. Basically, the idea is that trans people are dangerous, that we are outliers, that we are threatening the safety and security of women's rights. But equal rights is not a pie that we share. If I take a slice of pie, if I get equal rights, it does not mean that I'm taking away equal rights from somebody else. Equal rights means equal rights for everybody. And what we've seen in a lot of this gender critical debate right now is that the victims of it aren't necessarily always transgender people, but especially cisgender women who maybe not fit the typical standard idea of what a woman is meant to look like. And we've seen that particularly in the UK, where lesbian women who may be more butch or more masculine are being assaulted in bathrooms or thrown out of bars for being in women's spaces when they are actually a cis woman. So a lot of the gender critical debate is really dangerous for LGBT people across the board, but also obviously transgender people. But yes, it's the idea that we're dangerous, that we are unusual, and that we are annoying, and that we're asking for too much, when really we're just asking to be able to walk down the street without getting egged. I hope that answers your question, Mary.
Thank you, Leo. I will give an opportunity for any more questions at the end. I'm just conscious of time. So we will move on to our next speaker. And forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, but Dejin Gallagher, who's managing the new Mindfulness and Mental Health Project, A Cara Friend. With one-to-one and group support, the aim of the project is to help members of the LGBTQI+ community to take charge of their own mental health and emotional well-being, and teach some useful self-soothing skills to help self-regulation and stress management. In addition, meetings with a sympathetic mindfulness teacher means people can rapidly access a safe space in which to explore problems and concerns. Dejin's background as a mindfulness teacher arises from her 30 years of meditation practice and a decade spent in a Zen monastery in California before she came to Belfast in 2016, a woman after my own heart. And I will pass you over. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Stacey. Hi, everybody. Leo is a tough act to follow, I have to say. Yeah, I really admire him as a speaker. I just feel that passion, that personal, your story is so compelling, and thank you for being a mouthpiece. I'm just really appreciating you. So as Stacey mentioned, it's pronounced Jean. That's another long story. I was christened Jean, like any good little Irish girl, and I lived in France, where Jean is a man's name, and this got really uncomfortable when I was 12 or 13, so I started to spell it the way a French person would say Jean. And so strangely, I'd stuck with it. I kind of liked it. It's a genie. But now people don't know what to expect in terms of gender when they see DJINN, and I'm delighted with this unlooked for benefit. So, Jean. So I recently started to work with Cara Friend on what we've been looking for a way to describe it, our mindfulness and mental health project. And what I've been doing is meeting people online and providing them with a place where they first can feel safe. I hear that for many young people, if they have just one adult that they trust in their life, that this can be a great consolation. So I'm not sure I'm an adult, but the engagements that I've had with, particularly with young people in the trans community, has been really wonderful, really enlightening. Leo described very clearly the delays, the almost impossibility of accessing any kind of service, including support for mental health issues. So what we're doing is, I'm not a counselor, I'm not officially a trained counselor, but I am a listener, and I can listen to people who are in pain. And this ranges from like the LGBT community and also their families. We're seeing so many parents who are grieving for the stories of the children that they thought they had, and allowing them to access some kind of support means they're less likely to act out in ways that are not supportive. So mindfulness, for those who are familiar with it, and at this stage, I think many of us are. I saw a water bottle in Tesco the other day that had mindfulness on the side of it and a description underneath, and I thought, this is it, this is it. We have accessed the shelves in Tesco that people will want a water bottle that indicates their practice of mindfulness. So mindfulness, it's a very simple practice of returning to the body, being present in the body, in the moment, right here, right now. So for the most part, people's anxieties are about the future, and their discomfort is about the past. The stories of the things I'm afraid that will happen to me, and the things I'm furious about that have happened to me. Right now, in this moment, all of this is just in my head. All of these stories are intellectual activity. So if I can, and it's not easy to do, we say it's simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy to do this, but if I can find a way of I think of it, I have a kind of a visual image of what it's like. I sort of drop down into my body, into a place of stillness where the churning mental activity, the distress I'm feeling about something that's happening in my life, where that's on the surface. And I can find a space of stillness and release from that activity, that mental activity. And there's a lot of evidence to show that being able to access this place of stillness has beneficial effects for young people, for people in school, people in institutions of various kinds. And I've been seeing evidence lately that LGBT IQ kids feel better about themselves when they can access this this kind of when they can use these techniques, these strategies to help themselves calm down. One of the things that has been very interesting working with young trans people is that my awareness of the body, it kind of clashes in a way with what Leah mentioned as this resistance to what's going on in the body. And I had to negotiate that. It's kind of a difficult pathway. It's like, I want to accept my body because this is how I can feel calm and easy and spacious. But I also feel this resistance to what's going on with my body. I don't like the way my body is kind of betraying my idea of myself. And my way as a cis woman, my way of accessing how that might feel is to think about, ill health, to think about chronic illness, physical discomfort in various ways. So I can use mindfulness to be in my body. It doesn't mean I'm accepting the things, I'm accepting discomfort, or I'm accepting, we're not teaching just give up and say, oh, well, whatever is happening in my body is fine. This is not a passive acceptance of the body in that way. It's more of a, I think of what's often called the Serenity prayer in recovery circles, Reinhold Niebuhr, where it's seeking the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, and the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think of maybe Leo expressing very clearly the courage that it took for him to change the things that he could change, how much energy and good fortune, but how much courage that took for him. And what I'm trying to support people to do as they wait to access the services that are being denied them because of the incredibly long delays is to settle into this body as it is right now, just in this moment, just being here now. So it's not a fail-safe. It's not a band-aid for things that are going wrong in people's lives. I don't want to talk about any specific people, but you know, there are very, very young people. There's one person who's like a different gender from the rest of their school and has asked for their pronouns to be used and their name to be changed on the register. And they're 14. And the school are saying absolutely no way. So they're counting the days until they're 16 and can leave school. And this is a bright kid, smart as a whippet, you know, brilliant and funny and talented. And I think the education that they need, that they deserve, is being denied them by the school's resistance to anything outside the box, you know, and they really do present as the gender that they are, that I feel they are. Just the poignancy of that. What's lost, what we're losing, these wonderful people. And I think of every person that I've met while I've been doing this has been so thoughtful and wise and self-aware that it seems like this extra sense that these kids have, you know, they're so their self-awareness, their self-reflection is really inspiring. I don't know if anyone has seen what's it called, Heartstopper. It's on Netflix. I totally recommend it. Two different young people recommended it to me, and I sat down and watched all 8 episodes and cried at the end. And it's you know, year 8 kids who, it's unremarkable that one of them is trans and has left the boys' school and gone to the girls' school, and nobody ever even explains it. They just every so often say, oh yeah, she's trans. And this was just, see, this kind of representation, this non-specific, just acceptance of this is who people are, this is what's happening. It's just wonderful to see how nourished the people I'm talking to, the people I'm listening to, are feeling when this kind of representation is happening on screen. You know, this event is the power of awareness, and I think there are different aspects to that. I mean, obviously, visibility, being conscious of not everything fitting into our very regimented views of who people are, what we expect of them. But also, you know, awareness as a mindfulness practice, that we listen and pay attention, that we notice maybe our own resistance to certain concepts. We notice when our reactivity comes up, our judgment. And mindfulness being so much about noticing the judging mind and letting that just be. Just noticing, accepting, and letting it be what it is. Young people who've experienced transphobia, homophobia, exclusion, bullying by their classmates and by their peers, are in distress. Some of them are seeing GPs, and the GPs have been prescribing not antidepressants, but beta blockers to manage the symptoms of panic attacks. This seems to be a limited and potentially dangerous way of managing the situation. It's better than nothing. It's certainly better than what the kids had been threatening to do. They're accessing car friends, mindfulness and mental health. And they're coming in going, I don't want to live like this. And it's really worrying to hear people saying that. I don't want to live like this anymore. So mostly I'm doing a kind of management of their distress, Okay, we'll meet again next week. And every day you're going to sit for a little bit. You're just going to be still. I teach them various tricks with the hand on the heart, or, cupping their face in their hands with pressure on the vagus nerve, that they can settle down, slow down their breathing, sit upright, and access their own strengths. I think of mindfulness as a revolutionary practice. I think of it as a world-changing exercise that starts in this very small, very quiet way. I have faith that if enough people were to practice in this way, that we could change the world. That we wouldn't take the dualism, the binary stories about right and wrong, male and female, good and bad, demons and us. We're so familiar with this othering of people. So awareness as a way of paying attention. I had one story about a young person who said to me, old women get the hormones I want. And I went, old women? And then I thought, she actually means women, I'm 60, women who are about 20 years younger than me are old women. But it was a very powerful moment. I thought, yeah, us old women. There are headline stories in the US about women being unable to access hormones and how this could lose the Democrats the next election because women aren't getting estrogen. And here I have a 19-year-old who's horrified by the changes that are happening in her body, like appalled by the things that she can't control, and going, I just want what you old women get. So yeah, this is my question. Can we change the world? How can we change the world? And I think that Leo answered that well. We show up and we listen, show up and we pay attention. So I'm relatively little to say, I think.
Thank you. I am a certified life coach and Reiki master myself, so I'm totally on board. Conscious awareness and mindfulness is the way forward for inner peace and overall well-being. Yeah. I think if we all spread that, we would all be a lot happier, just within ourselves and with the community in general, and it would alleviate a lot of pressure from us all in the day-to-day. So thank you so much for that, Jean. I really enjoyed it. But I'm going to jump on quickly to Aisling and come back to any questions at the end, if you don't mind, just because of time. So Aisling, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Can you hear me okay?
I can indeed. I'm just going to do a wee introduction for you. So Aisling is from the Rainbow Project, and she's Policy and Advocacy Manager. Before joining the Rainbow Project in 2018, she worked at the Northern Ireland Assembly in the publications and PR sector. Her role is shaping the organisation's response to emerging issues for the LGBTQIA community, and she works within a wide range of stakeholders and is always on the lookout to maximising Rainbow's opportunities for external engagement and partnership working. So I will hand over to you, Aisling.
Great, thank you so much, Stacey, and hello to everybody. You're joining me from rather rainy Dublin. I don't know if you can see, but I'm in a very grand room, like chandelier and everything in the background of it. I'm actually speaking at an event today on banning conversion practices. So Minister O'Gorman from the Dáil was here today, and it's in partnership again, like Stacey said, about partnership working was with our partners LGBT Ireland. So just trying to raise a bit of awareness around the ban conversion therapy campaign in the north. Obviously, I don't need to let everybody know, but we're in a bit of a tricky situation when it comes to government at the moment. I don't think it's made the news at all, but the work in terms of ban conversion therapy is still ongoing. Those discussions are still happening. So it was a bit of an opportunity to make that aware. Today, I know you've asked me to speak on the state of the community survey that we carried out in 2021. Now, this survey, there's just far too much to tell you in 15 minutes. There was 1,100 responses, over 130 questions and 14 different topics. So I could spend 15 minutes just talking on one of those. So I'm going to talk you through some of the key points of the presentation. I was going to show a presentation, I don't know if that's possible, but I'll talk you through what information we garnered from that research. Now, like I said, the research got over 1,100 responses, and the results of this survey are to help us identify the needs of the community and allow us to develop and maintain services catered directly to meet those needs, but also to help us ensure that we're working on the right campaigns and the right policy for the community going forward. So some of the topics that we covered in the survey, and hopefully some of you completed that as well, was about your experiences of being an LGBTQI person in Northern Ireland. Leo's talked about the experiences of trans healthcare, and that was covered in the survey. We also looked at employment, we looked at homelessness, we looked at sexual health, we looked at mental and emotional health, just following on from the previous speaker about how important that is and how our community is disproportionately affected by mental health. We also looked at substance misuse, we looked at hate crime, we looked at domestic abuse, so a whole range of different things. And unfortunately, I just don't have time within the 15 minutes to really dive into all the information that's contained within the survey, but it's just to give you an overview of what we did and what we've done since that survey came out. So in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of demographics, about 35% identified as gay, about 15% identified as lesbian, 16% identified as bisexual, about 6% identified as queer, and then we had about 2% representation from asexuals and about 4% from others. So this would be other people choosing to describe their sexual orientation in different ways. In terms of gender breakdown, about 45% identified as a man, and that includes trans men in that. 43% women, and again includes trans women in that. We had a really high percentage of people from non-binary, so we had about 7% of our respondents, and then about 1.5% of those who identify as gender fluid. In terms of demographics, where people were coming from in terms of completing the survey, about 34% from Belfast, which is unsurprising given it's our capital city in the north. We had about 10% in Derry and Strabane, about 7% in Armagh, Brambridge, Ards and North Down, about 9%. And the lowest response that we actually got was in Fermanagh and Omagh. So that identifies there's a body of work for us to do in terms of reaching out into the Fermanagh and Omagh district. In terms of age and ethnicity, about 96% of those who responded to the survey identified as white, and about 4% came from a BME, person of colour, or a mixed background. So again, it showed us that there was a low representation from that section of the community, and there was a body of work for us to do in terms of that. In terms of ages, actually the highest number that we got was from the 30 to 44%, or 30 to 44 years old demographic, about 36%. We had about 11% from people under 18, and then over 60s, we had about 5.5% of respondents. So a good mix across the board. In terms of disabilities, we had about 64% of those respondents said that they have experienced a mental health condition. And this could be that they are currently or have experienced depression. Some also identified schizophrenia as an issue as well. We had some people who also identified that they had learning difficulties, neurodevelopment disorders such as autism or dyslexia, ADHD. So it showed us that there's a body of work for us to do in regards to that. Some of the key points, and I'm trying to zip through this as fast as I can. One of the key questions we asked was, when did you first become aware that you might be an LGBTQI person? 14. We asked the same question, when did you first become aware that you might be a trans, non-binary or gender fluid person? 14. But there's about 4 to 5 years difference between knowing and telling. And again, I think that follows on from previous speaker about those young people who are coming to terms with their own sexual orientation and gender identity and trying to navigate their way in the world with that information. We looked at the experiences of trans healthcare, and I'm sure Leo picked up on this on his earlier presentation. About 51% of those who responded to the questions on trans healthcare said that they've tried to access services either through the gender identity clinic or the knowing or identity service. Over 55% who accessed service through the Knowing Your Identity child and adult services said that the service was either bad or very bad. And 32% of adults accessing the gender identity clinic have been waiting over 3 years before accessing their first appointment. Some of the direct feedback that we got in regards to trans healthcare, and these are comments directly from the clients. They felt blamed, they felt accused, they treated me as if I had purposely put myself in a bad situation. They asked unnecessary and invasive questions about my personal life and also had invasive clinical examinations. Knowing your identity was worse than ineffective. It meant it worsened my mental health without providing any help in my transition. It took years to get into the clinic and I had to go through my GP. But once I was in, it was good, but it takes too long to get into the system. So really reflecting some of those experiences that Leo talked about in his earlier presentations. But we didn't just look at healthcare, we looked at employment and we looked at housing as well. Over 80% of the respondents who took part in the survey were open in the workplace, but about 20% are still not open to anyone within their workplace around their sexual orientation or gender identity. 66% were either in full-time or part-time employment, and the majority of them were working within the public sector. 28% said that they didn't know a single LGBTQI person in their workplace. And over 47% have actually heard negative comments about being a member of the community from either a colleague or a client in their workplace. In terms of homelessness, 14.5% have experienced homelessness. 31% said that it was directly related to their sexual orientation or their gender identity. 12% left permanent accommodation due to intimidation. This can be connected to hate crime, antisocial behaviour, but also can be connected to family fallouts and relationship breakdown. So again, a body of work for us to do. Some of the comments that we got in regards to homelessness really reflect those experiences. One said, my family believed who I was a sin and I needed to be fixed, and I was kicked out for being a sinner in their eyes. I was harassed and intimidated out of my home by my neighbours because of my sexual orientation. My family kicked me out for being trans. They gave me a choice, either go back to church with them on a weekly basis or stay in the closet. I left. Sexual health was another area that we looked at. About 30% of respondents had accessed sexual health. A massive number hadn't accessed any type of sexual health. Those who did make appointments, over 14% of them didn't follow up on the appointment because they were scared of intimidation from either the healthcare provider or the fact that they may need to come out to that healthcare provider in order to access the help. We looked at PrEP. About 8% of respondents to the survey have accessed PrEP to reduce their risk around contracting HIV. The majority of them access PrEP either through the GUM clinic or I Want PrEP Now. 27% did identify, and it's a fallout of COVID, unfortunately, that about 27% of them struggle to access that healthcare during the lockdown periods. Mental and emotional health. And this is something that's very prevalent within our community, unfortunately. 65% of respondents said that they have experienced depression. 26% of those said that the experiences of poor mental health was related to their sexual orientation or their gender identity. 40% said that they have self-harmed in the last 3 years. And 45% said that they have experienced suicidal ideation. The good news is, of those who have experienced those thoughts, over 80% of them know where to contact and how to contact somebody when they're experiencing that level of poor mental health. 72% have spoken to their GPs, and others have accessed mental health services either through the LGBT community or other organisations. We also looked at hate crime and domestic abuse. 43% of the community said that they were worried or fairly worried about being a victim of crime in Northern Ireland. 51% have not reported any incidents of hate crime to the police or any support services. Excuse me. And over 24% have experienced online harassment through social media. And one that was identified with gay and bi and trans men was abuse and intimidation through Grindr, for example. When we look at incidences of domestic abuse, 42% of respondents said that they have been in a relationship that was either harmful, hurtful, verbally, physically, or sexually. But what was most staggering is that almost 70% have never reported any incidences of violence, abuse, coercion, intimidation to the police or any other service. 32% felt pressured into having sex. 42% have experienced violence at home. This can be a partner or an ex-partner or somebody within the family. And 16% have experienced financial control as well. We asked them about their experiences of working with the community, working with the LGBT sector, working with the Rainbow Project. We also asked them to look at our branding and some of our logos. So that was part of the survey as well. So I've zipped through quite a lot of information there and quite a lot of facts, but there's so much contained within this survey, and so much is actually feeding into the work that we're doing going forward. And I just want to talk about some of those things that we've done since finding out that survey. So I said about 4% identified as coming from the BME ethnic minority backgrounds. So we knew there's a large percentage of the community we're not talking to. So what we did is we invested time and we got funding into doing a specific piece of work around BME LGBTQI experiences in Northern Ireland. That research has just been completed and we're working on that report at the moment, and we hope to release that in the summer of next year. We also looked internally at the work that we do in terms of BME work, in terms of supporting our members of staff and how we can recruit better and support the community better as well. Over 88% of respondents within the survey said that they wanted us to develop more mental health services. So again, we put time and we put effort into putting together a package with our partners in Here and I to get £250,000 worth of funding into the department, or from the Department of Health into our services to expand our counselling team, to expand our work in terms of family support within that, and to expand our work in our arts development as well in terms of art therapy. 80% wanted to see us continue with the work that we do in hate crime services. We launched the Hate Crime Advocacy Service in partnership with Victim Support, Leonard Cheshire and the Migrant Centre in April of this year. So that's putting us on a footing going forward for the next 3 years to continue to support victims of homophobic, transphobic and biphobic hate crime in Northern Ireland. 77% wanted us to see development into youth services. So we launched Rainbow Youth in March 2022, and we're looking to expand that work over the next year or so. We also expanded our trans and non-binary services with our BU, and we were delighted that we were able to secure funding to help put our trans swimming service on a more permanent fixture going forward for the next couple of years. And also, you may have noticed that we've changed some of our branding and our new logo. So they're direct fallout from the survey that we've done, which is feeding directly into the work that we're doing going forward. And that's only the start of it, because like I said, there's so much information, there's so much services that we need to do and to develop, and we're always listening. That's what we want to do. So the work that we've done in this survey feeds into more research, which feeds directly into supporting the community and identifying services that they need. So I will leave it there, and then we've got time for a few questions.
Thank you, Aisling. That was excellent. Really, really informative. I just want to say that we did have planned for Dr. Ray McKim to join us, and he was super excited of giving a presentation, but unfortunately has fallen ill. So I will open up to questions for any of our speakers, if you have any. I can't see everybody on my screen, so if you do have, and I don't see you, please just shout out.
I think I speed talked everybody into the ground there.
Not at all.
Can I actually ask a question? Sorry.
Of course you can.
Hold on, I'm going to try and put on my camera here. Hi. So I'm Michelle. I work for Extern Homeless Support Team. I don't know if I'm just throwing the question out there. I don't know if you're going to answer it directly, or maybe other people can answer it. But it's happened a couple of times now where we've worked with people who are trans. Like the example I'm going to give is somebody who would identify as a trans man, and he's homeless. But he's been placed, the place that's been identified by the housing executive then has been the Utility Street Men's Hostel. And we were just wondering, I think it ended up being that he wasn't placed in Utility Street. I think there were some concerns about how Utility Street felt that they could support him there. And I'm just wondering, would you take is the best way to support somebody who's trans to take the lead in how they would feel in going into a place, or is it to have that kind of discussion about, I don't know if I'm just being naive or I just don't have enough understanding, but about they could be vulnerable if to the men in that hostel, if they realized that this person was a trans man.
Totally.
Whether do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. Aisling, do you want to take this one? See, you know,
Totally, I can see Leo
Yeah, both of you
as well.
yeah.
I think both of us are probably going to be saying the same thing, is that you take it on the person. You take it on that individual and what they would feel would best service their needs. Unfortunately, we don't have any LGBT specific spaces in Northern Ireland in terms of housing. It is something that the Rainbow Project have been championing before. There are issues in regards to safety for that person, whether they feel comfortable in that space as a trans or non-binary person. Again, the housing executive don't have a policy when someone is non-binary. Where do they go? And there are many issues for people going into temporary accommodation. They may have previous bad experiences of going into that temporary accommodation. They may feel unsafe with shared accommodation as well, in terms of anxiety and other issues as well. But we always feel it needs to be on a person-led basis. And if that person is having difficulty or they need somebody to advocate for them, they're more than happy to get in contact with the Rainbow Project, and we'll support them in that to make sure that they get the most appropriate placement for them. Yeah. Whether that's in a single sex hostel, whether that's in a temporary accommodation, within the local community or whatever. We also we previously had a housing officer where we were hosting sort of queer house shares as well, in terms of sharing that information for people as well. So we would always, any of the work that we do is always led by the client and what the client wants to do.
Okay.
Leo, have you
Thank
anything
you.
to add there, love? No. Okay. Any other questions? I'm scrolling through and I don't see anything. So to that end, I just want to thank you all for coming, and I want to tell you that if you are interested in coming to join us at NIPSA LGBTQI+ group, we do have a very active and powerful group, and we are super involved in raising awareness across this, all of the issues in the sector, and working for equal rights for all. And we would like to see anybody at all, members, come and join us and get involved. And you can contact us at our LGBTQI+ group at nipsa.org.uk email, or on our telephone number 0895 442 591. And please be advised that our group is entirely confidential, so people don't need to know that you are a member of the group, and we will not inform anybody that you are a member of the group. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all of our presenters. It was super informative, and I look forward to see what is to come, and how much more we can do. I see a couple of hands going up. Julie, do you have something to say? No. Okay, no worries. If that's everything, I say goodbye then. Geraldine, do you have anything to add?
Sure, just to say a big thank you to all our excellent speakers today, to Leo, Aisling and Jean, and to yourself, Stacey, for chairing today's session. Thank you so much. And to all our participants today, thank you for joining us, and I hope you got a lot out of our event today. And as stated in the chat, this event has been recorded, and we will be posting it on our website. So I did make you aware of that at the very outset of the event. So if anyone has any issue with it after this event, can you please contact me directly by email? Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, folks, and enjoy the rest of our wet and miserable day. Hopefully it'll brighten up in the coming days.
That was brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.